What's up everyone, Darth Gandalf here. Today I am bringing you a hopefully informative video on how many troops Gondor could rally before the siege of Minas Tirith. I see this question get asked a lot, and nobody really has answers, because in canon, the proper answer simply doesn't exist, but I'm going to do my best anyway, using the books as a direct reference, so let us begin. Remember that scene from Return of the King where Gandalf asks Denethor, "Where are Gondor's armies?" And Denethor replies back overly dramatically, "Gondor has none." Well, turns out Denethor was, as I said, being overly dramatic. Obviously, Gondor has armies, but how big are Gondor's armies? When thinking of Gondorian soldiers, you'll probably immediately think of the soldiers from the films. You know, the guys who are Lord of the Rings version of stormtroopers, with plate armor that behaves more like plastic, and are so woefully incompetent that Gandalf literally has to tell them to loose their arrows at the trolls instead of the giant armored siege tower. As much as I love the movies, this portrayal isn't exactly accurate. They've held Mordor and the Men of Darkness at bay for over 1,000 years, and their soldiers certainly aren't pushovers, and to reiterate, they certainly do have an army, and it's not just a bunch of metal stormtroopers. Unfortunately, Tolkien is often very vague about army sizes. We'll get some numbers, but not others. The only army we can be absolutely sure of is the army of Rohan, which is supposed to be 12,000 strong at full muster, but only 6,000 end up riding to Minas Tirith. With Gondor, we have to speculate, but also work with what we do know. For example, we know Gondor is the strongest nation still opposing Sauron, so it would be only natural to assume their army is larger than Rohan's, and we have some confirmed numbers that can pretty much back that up. So, what numbers do we know for certain? Well, in the Return of the King novel, Pippin watches the captains of the Outlands, who come from Gondor's southern fiefdoms, arriving with their troops to reinforce Minas Tirith. This force consists of just under 3,000 troops, which leaves the people at Minas Tirith extremely disheartened. One example is the men from Lossarnoch, led by their lord Forlong the Fat, who number only 200 men. One onlooker comments that they were expecting 10 times that amount from him, which would be 2,000 men, obviously a big difference. The people at Minas Tirith were obviously expecting a far larger force to come to their defence, possibly 2 to 3 times larger, but that is just speculation. The reason the southern lords do not send Minas Tirith more troops is because their own lands are about to be attacked by Corsairs and Haradrim. Sauron has learned from his past mistakes, and this time plans on keeping his enemies divided. Of course, the fiefdom troops aren't the only ones defending Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith has its own garrison. There is the garrison at Osgiliath, which is reinforced by Faramir's troops from Heneth-Anun, as well as more troops from Minas Tirith. There is the garrison at Caer Andros, and there are men manning the causeway forts, surrounding the Pelennor. It's hard to give numbers, but we can sort of make an educated guess with the help of later figures we receive. So, while the Battle of Pelennor Fields is being fought, Aragorn is blazing through the south with the army of the dead. He comes across Angbor the Fearless, Lord of Lamadon, fighting Haradrim at the town of Linhir. After driving them off, he arrives at the city of Pelargir, where the army of the dead takes the Corsair fleet and sets free many slaves who are manning the ships. Important to note that the army of the dead do not act like they do in the movies, and instead use fear as their weapon to defeat the Corsairs and Haradrim. There are no invincible green ghosts who slaughter everything in their path. Aragorn then gathers troops from the fiefs of Lebanon and Ephyr, while Angbor arrives with his own troops. Although it is not 100% confirmed, it's implied that Aragorn took control of at least 30 of the Corsairs' larger ships, each boarded by a member of the Grey Company. Aragorn then sails up the Anduin with his own troops, and we can pretty much assume his fleet was at maximum capacity for 3 reasons. The first reason, Angbor travels towards Minas Tirith on foot with 4,000 men. And yes, that is the first increase to the troop counter since the start. The second reason, more troops follow Aragorn up the river on smaller craft, some of them arriving days later. Their numbers are unknown. The third reason, Aragorn was worried about Minas Tirith falling before he arrived. He would not have left behind so many soldiers unless he had to. So how many troops sailed up the Anduin with Aragorn? Well, once again, we're kind of guessing, but we're using our own history to estimate. The Corsair ships are described as being sailed, but also oared by slaves, who were freed by Aragorn, but decide to stay on as free men. The ships sort of fit the description of galleys, and are also later described as dromons, which are galley-type ships. In ancient and medieval times, these ships could carry several hundred people, Roman galleys even carrying as many as 400. If Aragorn's galleys carried 400 men, assuming half of them are oarsmen, Aragorn would have arrived with 6,000 soldiers. I think this is a little unlikely, but if each ship only carries 100 men, half of them being soldiers, Aragorn would have only arrived with 1,500 men, which I believe is also a little unlikely. I'm willing to take a middle ground here and say that each ship carried 200, with half of them being soldiers, meaning Aragorn arrives to battle with 3,000 soldiers of Gondor, which is enough to turn the tide of the battle. We'll add that to the counter. So the Battle of Pelennor Fields is won, and the leaders find themselves plotting their next move. In the last debate, everyone comes to the agreement that 7,000 men will march on the Black Gate, 6,000 of them being soldiers of Gondor. It is also mentioned that Minas Tirith will be better defended than it was before the assault began. Those are Aragorn's words. So how well was Minas Tirith defended? Well, this is more of an estimation, but I've done a bunch of maths to support these estimates. Those figures basically revolve around how many men Gondor lost, and that requires a bit of, I guess, interpretation of Aragorn's words. Anyway, that stuff is way too long for this video. If you want to know how many troops Gondor lost to Pelennor, I can do another video. But this video is focusing entirely on the overall size of Gondor's army. My estimates are that the garrison at Minas Tirith was 1,000 strong, not including the fiefdom men. Osgiliath's garrison, which was made up of reinforcements from Minas Tirith and Heneth-Nun, sat at 3,000. Uramasakor was manned by 1,000 men, and Caer Andros was manned by 1,000 men. Overall, 6,000 more soldiers to add to the encounter. This brings Gondor's army to 16,000. This last bit of proper information comes from Aragorn himself, who says that many men were bidden to follow him up the Anduin in smaller craft, and that more of them were arriving by the day. These men aren't part of Angbor's 4,000 troops, and I'm willing to estimate a further 2,000 or so arrived that way. We're up to 18,000 troops now. And now the guesses really start to come in. We can probably assume Gondor's other lords didn't leave their lands entirely undefended. Places like Dol Amroth, Linhir, and Pelargir surely kept a sizable garrison. Coastal regions such as Anfalas, Belfalas, and Lebanon surely didn't stay completely undefended. We can't assume that every soldier in Gondor marched towards Minas Tirith. Remembering that Lossarnach, a small region near Minas Tirith, was expected to provide 2,000 men instead of 200, we can assume that these other regions also kept plenty of men at home to defend. Some of them would have been included in Angbor's soldiers, but those from more western fiefs would not have fought at Pelargir. This is a wild guess, but I expect that another 3,000 or so troops were stationed throughout central and western Gondor. So this brings the final tally to 21,000 soldiers, and I think that is a fairly good number. If we're taking margins for error into account, then I think it would be perfectly reasonable to say that Gondor's army sat between 20 to 25,000 men. Much larger than Rohan's army, and large enough to defend Gondor, but not large enough to launch proper offensive action against Mordor and its allies. An interesting quote from Imrahil when the host of the West is marching towards the Black Gate states that the 7,000 men they had would have barely been the vanguard of Gondor's ancient armies. Although a vanguard isn't clearly definable, late medieval warfare states that armies would consist of the vanguard, the middle, and the rear. If all three formations were the same size, then Gondor's ancient field armies would have consisted of 20,000 men, which is larger than Gondor's entire military at the moment. I think that just shows how far Gondor has fallen. Thank you for watching. I'm a massive Tolkien nerd, and I really enjoyed making this video. It's not amazing work, but I'm getting used to it. I haven't made videos in over 5 years. Please leave feedback, and please let me know if you agree with my numbers. If you'd like me to make more videos, leave suggestions, and subscribe. If you didn't like the video, you can subscribe, unsubscribe, and then I'll get the notification and feel a rush of hope before being crushingly disappointed. This is Darth Gandalf, thank you, and farewell.